big shout out to you for making it through the hectic holiday season. This new year, get clean, quality, pregnancy nutrient support off your to-do list, including Ritual's best-selling Essential Prenatal Multivitamin, designed with 12 traceable key ingredients to support a healthy pregnancy. With big changes coming up, take the small steps now and start today with 30% off a 3-month supply at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Wow.
What's up?
I just bought and financed a car through Carvana in minutes.
You? The person who agonized 4 weeks over whether to paint your walls eggshell or off-white bought and financed a car in minutes?
They made it easy. Transparent terms, customizable down and monthly. Didn't even have to do any paperwork.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Hey, have you checked out that spreadsheet I sent you for our dinner options?
Finance your car with Carvana and experience total control. Financing subject to credit approval.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Terms and conditions apply.
You got problems that you ought to be concerned with. Moolah. You don't know how you're supposed to earn it, or what to do with it, or how to keep it. You're a freak with a dark, shameful secret. But you're not the only one. Get your hidden financial fears with a blast of sun. Now your healing has begun. It's Bad with Money with Gabe S. Dunn.
Hello and welcome to Bad with Money, a show about finances and feelings where we don't talk down to you. I'm your host, Gabe S. Dunn. And with me today, I'm very excited for this episode. We have the author of All the President's Money, Megan Gorman. Will you like to tell our audience who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited. I'm a tax attorney by training, and I work in the high net worth space. And I work with clients on all aspects of their financial planning. So I do their taxes, their estate planning, their investing, and really all their money problem solving. And one of the things I've learned over the course of my career is that everybody has money problems, regardless of how many zeros you have on your net worth statement. And so that's a little bit about me. And I sort of took my money expertise and applied it to the presidents.
Yeah, so the book is about how the men who governed America governed their money, which is so perfectly nerdy. Like, I was delighted. I actually had this out, and my ex, who the fans know hangs out all the time, is a ex-accountant and is like a software engineer. And he was like, can I have that?
I love that. But yeah, you're right. It's total geek fest, but I am a geek.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think being a geek about money is sort of fun. And what I learned along the way was that some of the presidents were good with money and geeky, and some not so much. So
yeah. So I have a lot highlighted that I'd like to go through.
Okay. Are we going to talk about Thomas Jefferson?
Well, yeah.
Yes, bad with money.
Yeah. It's funny because we're recording. This is our third episode that we're recording today because we're banking. And the first guy we spoke to, we were talking about reparations, and we mentioned Thomas Jefferson being evil, and that he was like, I can give George Washington some grace. Thomas Jefferson, evil. And then I have you coming here to talk about Jefferson as well. Like, he's really getting dragged today.
I know. But you know what? I think we're just looking at him a little more realistically for who he is. And I think there's always this idea that if you're successful in other areas of your life, you're successful with money, right? And people are always surprised when they hear that there are presidents that struggled financially. And so, Thomas Jefferson, he's a brilliant philosopher, brilliant writer. And trust me, I'd give up all my money skills to be able to write and think like him. But he wasn't good with a lot of the basic building blocks of finance. And that really does him in. And what I mean by this is, we talk all the time about things like budgeting, right? Budgeting is sort of like a dirty word. It's exhausting. We all have to do it. Although rich people call it cash flow management, but, right? But budgeting becomes so much more important when you have an asset base like Jefferson's that is incredibly illiquid. And his asset base was predominantly land, plantations, and unfortunately slaves. And what Jefferson really struggles with over the course of his life is connecting with his budgeting skills and being present with his money. And as you know, being present with your money is half the battle.
You do dive deep into the slave owners of it all. So can you talk about what Jefferson's deal was with money? And, he comes across in the book as very unself-aware.
We all know there's like brilliant people who are like completely lack self-awareness in certain areas of their life. But, Jefferson in his life had a really challenging set of circumstances. Yes, he came from money. Yes, he was well educated, but he was living in a time period where death was quite commonplace, right? And I talk about this in the book, but the average life expectancy in his time was, late 50s, early 60s. And so the type of work we do today on longevity planning in finance was not even something he would have had in his wheelhouse. But he was also focused on honor. And what I mean by that is he would assume the debts of people. And in particular, he assumed the debt of his father-in-law. And when his father-in-law died, he was left with the debt. And over the course of Jefferson's life, he would also loan people money when he had no business doing that. And what I mean by budgeting is when you have illiquid assets, you're constantly trying to make sure that you're staying liquid, right? Like with my clients, and this is true of anybody, you need a cash reserve. And Jefferson never had a cash reserve. He just kept borrowing against future things. And so it's sort of a cycle. And we see this with people today where they almost are like ostriches and they push their head in the sand and they don't deal with things in the present moment. Now, even though he had a challenging asset base, his peer, George Washington, had just as much the same asset base. And instead, Washington was an amazing budgeter. If you ever get to see any of the books of George Washington that he wrote, his budgeting it's impeccable with his handwriting and a detail in it. I mean, this was a guy who kept receipts. And when Washington would run into illiquidity, he was willing to make sacrifices. He would sell a patch of land to get some cash flow in. So two men who lived in the same time period, same type of asset bases, but handled them completely different. And this comes out at their deaths because between the two, Washington dies, owns 52,000 acres around the country, worth about $400 million in our money, right? And that when he died, I think they said it was 750,000. Jefferson, right before he dies, has to put Monticello up for auction. So any of us could have shown up, bought a ticket, and tried to bid on Monticello. Now, before it went to auction, a group of, supporters of Jefferson came to him and said, don't do this. Let's try to raise some money for you to help you. So they took it off the auction block. They never really raised any money for him. And when he does die, his family is forced to sell Monticello. So, and in fact, his slaves were sold as well and broke up a lot of those families. So again, two men, same circumstances, very different results.
I was thinking about the story with Jefferson because he doesn't seem embarrassed by the sale of Monticello, like putting it up for auction, but him doing so after being president seems to be very embarrassing to everyone else, which is why they gather together and tell him not to do it.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like was he ashamed of that at all? It seems like he just kind of was very like, yeah, I'm just going to have to do this. And everyone was like, it's going to look real bad for a president of the United States to be auctioning off all his stuff.
Yeah, it's so funny because you bring up a great point. Like, I would be horrified it was me. But here's the thing. And you see it in the letters with Jefferson. People were afraid to say something to him, right? It's sort of like celebrity culture today, right? Do they ever really hear no? Right? Same thing. Like people didn't want to broach it to him. And I found one letter from his grandson where it was in a postscript to the letter where he sort of asks what's going on with the auction. So I think with Jefferson, some of it is people weren't direct with him. They had a lot of reverence for him during his lifetime. And I think he sort of kept blinders on. I think it's how he kept his sanity when he was at the risk of losing his home. And by the way, when he did go to put it up for auction, Monticello was falling apart. It's not like what you see today when you go there. You know, it was not in great condition because he couldn't keep up with the maintenance. So in a weird way, I wonder if it was like a relief for him that he actually had a solution, right? Like bankruptcy can be a relief when somebody actually gets to that point. So it could have been that moment.
I mean, the not thinking ahead. Well, also, I like the information about how he would just throw these huge parties, these huge bacchanals, and that he was like insistent that everything be from France.
If you wanted to get to invited to a party, you totally want to be invited by Jefferson. But again, we know people like this, right? You know, you see these people and they have money, but they're spending. And they're hoping at some point they figure it all out. And that's that in personal finance, that idea of connecting with your future self. Like, who's the Jefferson going to be in 10, 20, 30 years? Just like you and I both think, well, who do I want to be in 10, 20, 30 years with our money? And Jefferson just sort of hoped he'd figure it out down the line or die before it caught up with him.
It's also interesting because these stories aren't put together in the book. The thing with George Washington, where he dies and he says, after Martha dies, that's when the slaves, all his slaves will be free.
Yes.
And that's incredible ish for the time, question mark ish, sort of regular. But anyway, so the problem there being that, and I was laughing a little bit because it is funny and it put a big target on Martha's back. So she ended up a year later just releasing the slaves, which I loved.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right? Drafting errors in estate planning happen all the time. Like I know when I'm working with clients, I'll say, okay, how is this really going to play out? And, you know, Washington had a lot of experience with estate plans. You know, he had been executor for a number of families. He had a complex asset base that he spent hours on. And the fact that he made this drafting error, I mean, it's just sort of such an oops, right? Because if you actually read it out loud, it would have been very, very clear to you that if the slaves were freed upon her death, she was going to be the one that could be potentially killed. And you see this with...
And he didn't tell her. He didn't tell her. She found out in the will.
She found out in the will, and they published the will in every newspaper around the world. So everybody knew. It wasn't like she could hide this fact. It was out there. And Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, goes down and sees Martha. Because, I mean, and Abigail Adams was an abolitionist. She was not a supporter of slavery. And here she finds, you know, grieving Martha Washington, devastated about this estate plan issue. So it's funny because it makes George Washington feel a lot more like us and less that guy you see on the dollar bill who seems so, you know, stiff and marble-like, right? He makes mistakes too. And I sort of appreciated that about Washington. You know, he was willing to, you know, be human in this sense.
Yeah. But it is interesting. Like, I do like how the book is just like, look, you cannot discredit how much these people were absolutely buoyed by slavery.
Yes.
And that's like a huge part of it. And how, you know, I think you do a lot of work to sort of make it so that all things even. Like, you're like, okay, you can say this person was really good at money, but they also had like an estate full of slaves. Or you could say this person, this president was really bad at money, but like, look at the circumstances of his life and that sort of thing. So I did appreciate that like aspect of it, on top of how funny it is that I feel like Abigail Adams went down there and she was just like, this is too good.
I think she was a bit too ladylike, but I think that probably she felt like, well, this is sort of how it plays out, right? I mean, and that's the thing, they're all real people like they are today. And one of the things that always struck me in looking at George Washington is he had to hang out with guys like Jefferson and Madison and Monroe, who were so educated. And George Washington didn't go to college, right? When his father died, there wasn't even money left aside for him to go to college. And one of the things that strikes you about George Washington's money is throughout his life, when he was involved with charity, it was often to set money aside to help educate kids who didn't have money to go to school. And I sort of liked that about him. Like, it was very much like he felt he missed out and he was going to help others get the thing that he couldn't get.
And then Thomas Jefferson was like, that's dumb. More wine from France.
Exactly.
I'm just going to go through some stuff that I found interesting.
Tell me. I love this.
Okay, Your hair is so much more than what you see when you look in the mirror. From stress and nutrition to hormones to lifestyle. So many internal factors affect what you see on the outside. With Nutrafol's science-backed whole body approach, nourish growth from within and achieve your best hair yet. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Physician-formulated with 100% drug-free ingredients, Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. While many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, Nutrafol clinically tests final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol Men Hair Growth Supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol Women Hair Growth Supplement for 6 months. Building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription required. Automated deliveries and free shipping keep you on track. Plus, with a Nutrafol subscription, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and a Headspace meditation membership is included. Start your hair growth journey with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month's subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code BWM. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code BWM. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code BWM. New Year's resolutions are so hard to follow. I argue that we should probably just make these resolutions at any other time during the year when it's less stressful and there's less pressure on them. But if you have a specific resolution that you want to stick to, that you feel is like within your grasp, that isn't like so far-fetched, then I guess New Year's is as good a time as any to do it. Especially with money, because that stuff is like, you just need a kickstart, and it's really not that hard to do. It's really not so far off. If you have a big goal, only 8% of people stick to their resolutions all year long. But let's say there's a little goal that's a little more automatic, like Acorns. With Acorns, you can lock in years and years of healthy money habits in just 5 minutes. That's all the time it takes to open your account and start automatically saving and investing your money so it has a chance to grow. Automatically. That's key for one of those little resolutions. That's right. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare money you've got right now. You can start with $5 or even just your spare change. You don't need a ton of time. You can create your Acorns account and start investing in just 5 minutes. You don't need to feel like financial wellness is impossible. Acorns gives you small, simple steps to get you and your money on track. Again, what a good time to go for a resolution that isn't like climb Mount Everest, you know what I mean? Basically, Acorns does the hard part so you can give your money a chance to grow. As far as personal experience, you guys know that I've been up and down with investing. I've just gotten back into it with a very small amount of money. It really does matter. Watching it grow even a little bit is huge for me. And if you do start doing it, I mean, we would truly be on a better path financially than most people. Don't let it get you down that you're like, oh, it's just a small amount of money. That is like such an achievement in this country, I promise. Head to acorns.com/badmoney or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/badmoney. Can you believe it's 2025 already? Life moves pretty fast, and starting a new year always reminds me of that. Well, I don't know what's going to happen this year. I know I'm prepared for the unexpected. Are you? Fabric by Gerber Life helps you get term life insurance in minutes, so you can help protect your family's financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done right from your couch, all online and on your schedule. You could be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. If you've got kids, especially if you're young and healthy, the time to lock in low rates is now. Even if you have life insurance through your employer, it may not offer enough protection for your family, and it may not follow you if you leave your job. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget, like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. There's no risk. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can cancel at any time. They have over 1,900 five-star reviews on Trustpilot with a rating of excellent. Fabric was designed for busy parents like you, and it's more than life insurance. Free digital wills, access to investment accounts to invest for your kids' future, and more. And manage it all right from your phone. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/badwithmoney. That's meetfabric.com/badwithmoney. MEET fabric.com/badwithmoney. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Know that Hoover and Harding kind of pioneered the concept of the employee stock ownership program?
He was one of the first employers who helped set up an ESOP, right, where employees could have an ownership stake in a business. Now, Harding, as I talk about in the book, owned a newspaper in Ohio. And when he bought it for $300 with a group of friends. And then he got rid of all the friends who were involved. But the newspaper takes off because he has this crazy idea that you could advertise based on the seasons. Like you shouldn't be selling snow shovels in the middle of summer, which is like, yeah. But he builds this great newspaper enterprise, but his employees love him. And a lot of them are owners in the company and have shares, and they call him WG. And I have to say, he's not a great president, but the stories about him are fascinating. And I'll tell you one thing, he's always been joked about that in a poker game, he gave away the White House china. This has always been a long rumor about him. And so in writing the book, I had gotten to know the leading historian on Hoover and Harding, and I called her and I said, okay, is it true? Did he really gamble away the Benjamin Harrison china? And she said, we're asked this question so much. We've gone through everything, all of the financial archives, everything from the White House. And we can safely say he did not gamble away the White House china. So that is a story about him that's quite popular, but not true.
Wow. Yeah, it was that he gambled, like he said, right? The person could have any china and the person chose Benjamin Harrison or something.
Yes, which a very beautiful china set. I mean, this guy,
sure.
Red, white, and blue, the flowers. But I think the thing is, whenever you die, it's you got to hope that Jackie Kennedy is the one handling your legacy. And I say this because, Hoover and Harding dies and his wife dies the following year. So no one's there to preserve his legacy, right? And to create this vision of what he represented. And so he wasn't a great president, but he also gets a really bad rap because nobody's managing the legacy. And by the way, maybe the wife probably didn't want to, because even though she had helped sort of build his business, when he died, he put all the money in what we call a QTIP, a qualified terminable interest property trust, which basically said she gets use of the money while she's alive, but at her death, it goes right back to his heirs. So I don't know, if I was, his wife, Llorens Harding, and I helped build a business and then I didn't get to control the money when he died, I'd be sort of annoyed.
Wow, he really said, no, I'll be making all the choices.
So, Florence Harding, Martha Washington, what we're learning here is, ladies, ask a lot of questions about what these guys are doing with their estate plans, right? Because again, you want to be aware.
I also, it's interesting when you talk about that they are good, like if they're good with money in their personal lives, it doesn't necessarily translate, because you talk about like one of the guys that you say was really great is Herbert Hoover.
Oh my God, I love
But
him.
But what I know of Hoover comes from the musical Annie, which is that he was responsible for the Hoovervilles, which was like poor people.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? The Great Depression is a perfect mix of a number of people helping create a bubble and so on. So Herbert Hoover has the bad luck to be president when the market crashes. But the truth of the matter is, those were the worst 4 years of his life. And Herbert Hoover is a very good example of a person, an American, who took advantage and was able to create the American dream, but then created real meaning with wealth. And what I mean by this is, really quickly, he's born in Iowa. His dad dies when he's 4, mom dies when he's 9, and he's a Quaker. And they put him and each of his siblings with one of their aunts and uncles. But the Quakers set up a financial guardian who they have to write budgets for and submit to get access to money. So as a little boy, he's learning how to budget. And if you look at when children are supposed to learn about money, he does it right when he's supposed to be. Then he is a bookkeeper for his uncle. And then he goes to Stanford. And the Stanford football team, and I get into this in the book, is a hot mess. Now, the tuition at Stanford was 0 because he was in the pioneer class, but they were mishandling money. And so they vote Hoover in to be their treasurer. And he takes over the whole system, reorganizes it, and makes it profitable. Then he goes to Australia. He's a geologist, and he finds gold. But what's very important with Hoover throughout his whole life as he's making money is helping others. He was always about helping his siblings. And when he was in Australia running the gold mines, he'd write his best friend here in the US who was taking care of the money and would say, hey, Hinsdale, if any of our friends is in need of money, just give them money. Just don't tell them it's from me. And he was always about making sure others were okay. And this gets amplified because after World War I, when Europe is starting to starve, it's Hoover who goes in and through his budgeting skills helps get food overseas, saves Europe, and does it again after World War II. So this is someone who took, made all this money and didn't just do things for himself. It was all about others. And I think philosophy on wealth is so important, right? One of the things I find with my clients is when they finally start to make big money, they're excited, but they're also like, what's this all about now? What is this supposed to mean? Why me? Right? We have a tendency in the US culture to vilify people who make money, who get wealthy. What I find with people who get to have significant asset bases is a lot of times they're helping not just their immediate families, but their siblings, their nieces and nephews, their parents. It's a whole web around them that they're trying to use the money to support. And I think Herbert Hoover represents the best of American wealth building.
So it's interesting. And then after his presidency, he does then continue in that way. It's just during the presidency, he was taking the fall for the Great Depression. And that's sort of, because, you talk about legacy building with the Hardings. That's sort of the legacy of him that I know of, is that he was not a financially savvy president.
I think the thing is, right, we always talk about, wouldn't it be great if a business person ran the country, right? And what you find is, I think when you look at FDR, who succeeded Hoover, FDR was able to read the room and understand what needed to happen to help people. Whereas I think Hoover grew up having to figure it out on his own. And I think a little of that bled into his behaviors as president. Further with the fact that he didn't know how to manage a government. He had never done it before. You have to remember, FDR ran the state of New York. He had been the assistant secretary of the Navy. He had governmental jobs and understood how to maneuver the government around. So, Hoover had it tough in that sense. And I think it was always hard on him.
My next question.
Okay.
is a part where oh boy, can your finances take a hit during the holidays. I've definitely had stuff come up that I, forgot about last minute, gifts for people, realizing I don't have something for someone's plus one or significant other, trying to put together meals. I mean, you can think you've thought everything through for the holidays, and oh boy, might it take a while to recover financially. But we all get it, you know what I mean? Like, we're trying to spend time with people and make the most of it and have this magical time that we all look forward to all year long. We spend more than we should during the holidays. Take control of your finances by using a Chime checking account with features like no monthly or maintenance fees, fee-free overdraft up to $200, or get paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit. Learn more at chime.com/badmoney. I am notorious for forgetting about automatic payments, and then I overdraft. I have had a history of overdrafting my account. It's horrible. There's tons of fees. There's even fees for going below a certain number, even if you aren't overdrafting. Like, it is such a relief to have a Chime account that allows you to overdraft up to $200 with no fees. It's a financial tech company with a sense of community. You can have temporarily increased overdraft limits with boosts from friends. Join the millions of Chime members who are working on financial progress. Chime helps with fee-free overdraft up to $200. Your next deposit is applied to your balance. Get spotted on debit card purchases and cash withdrawals. No monthly fees or maintenance fees. Over 50,000 fee-free ATMs. To date, Chime has spotted members over $32 billion in transactions through SpotMe. Friends give friends a boost. Eligible members get complimentary boosts to temporarily increase a friend's SpotMe limit. When you give a boost, they can boost you back to temporarily raise your limit. Set up direct deposit in your Chime account. After a qualifying direct deposit of $200 plus, Chime will notify you to enroll in SpotMe. With an activated debit card, Chime will spot you up to $200 on debit card purchases and cash withdrawals. Your next direct deposit is applied to your negative balance. Chime never charges overdraft fees for using SpotMe. Enjoy the holidays while keeping your financial goals on track with Chime. Open your account in 2 minutes at chime.com/badmoney. That's chime.com/badmoney. Chime feels like progress. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. members FDIC. SpotMe eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Direct deposit timing depends on submission of payment file. Boosts are available to eligible Chime members enrolled in SpotMe and are subject to monthly limits. Fees apply at out-of-network ATMs and for OTC withdrawals.
At Verizon, anyone can trade in their old phone for a new one on us with Unlimited Ultimate, which means everyone in your family could get a new phone and stay on your family plan, keeping you close.
Hey, Mom, you seen my toothbrush? Yeah, I'm almost done with it.
Oh, maybe too close. Trade in and additional terms apply. See Verizon.com for details.
You talk about how all of these, where you're talking about self-education, and then you talk about all of these presidents that were born around the same time to benefit from the GI Bill. And it's George H.W., Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden.
Yep.
And H.W. is the only president who benefited directly from the GI Bill.
Right. Isn't that crazy?
Can you talk about, yeah. So can you talk about what that means?
So, what you have to do is go back to World War I. And at the end of World War I, the boys came over, the majority were boys, men, came home from overseas, and they were given like $60 and said, good luck. And it caused crazy inflation. People couldn't get a job, and they protested constantly. And they protested for 20 years, particularly in D.C. So FDR saw all of this during World War II, and he said to his people, he's like, look, we can't have a repeat of this. We've got to think about what's going to happen when they come home from the war. And so they looked at it as, okay, well, we want people to get access to capital to buy a house, access to capital to start a business, and access to capital to get educated. And so George H.W. Bush, he was a fighter pilot and in the Pacific. Tragically, he was in a plane accident. He got shot down, and everybody in the plane with him died except for him. And he really wanted to do something meaningful. And he was saving his paychecks because he was already married to Barbara. And he hears about the GI Bill, and he's like, wow, this is amazing. Like, they're going to pay us to go to school, pay for us to go to school. This had never happened before in American history. And he comes back and takes advantage of it. He goes to Yale, but he's already married to Barbara, and they already have a little boy named George W., right? So he goes and finishes Yale in 3 years. So he's the only president who gets to capitalize on the GI Bill. Now, other presidents took advantage of further incarnations of legislation to get access to capital to go to school, but nobody else was a direct recipient of the original GI Bill like George H.W. Bush. And H.W., we think of him as an older man, but I would tell you he's a very good example of the greatest generation. And what I mean by that is this is someone who could have come home from the war, went to Yale, and joined Wall Street and stayed with the family money. And the Bushes were interesting because they want each generation to make their own money. So what does George H.W. Bush do? He goes down to Texas, which today Texas is like very populated. There's oil everywhere. Yeah. But back then, nobody did this. And he went into the oil business, and his family was sort of like, look, good luck. We don't know if this is going to work. He eventually does have success in the oil business, and that's how he makes his money. But then his son, W, tries to get in the oil business, does an okay job, flounders around. W really doesn't make money until he helps be part of the group that bought the Texas Rangers. And we all know Jenna Bush Hager is on the Today Show today. So she's continuing the Bush family financial legacy by striking out on her own.
Yeah, that was interesting to see that the Bush family cuts off the other, like the next person, and then they have to figure out what they're going to do.
Exactly.
It's not really real because you always do have money, but it is a nice gesture.
It's a nice gesture. And it's also, look, it's very easy to take the path of no resistance and just coast off your money. Like we all know people in American culture who do that, right? But the idea of being willing to get yourself out there and try to create something new, I give people credit for that. And I feel the Bushes are a good example of that. And look, there's nothing worse than being the child of a president, right? I mean, look, think about it. I mean, they go after the Trump kids, they're going after the Biden kids. It's very, very difficult because you're so prominent and yet none of the achievement is yours, if you think about it. And so it's really, really difficult. But this is also because we live in the day and age where things can get monetized. We also have to remember, before Jerry Ford, when, people left the White House, they really just either went back to their prior job, practicing law typically, or wrote a book or just died. George Washington died 2 years after leaving the White House. So there really wasn't a great blueprint to monetize. And now, since Jerry Ford, it's become acceptable for them to leave the White House and monetize what they did in the presidency. And some things are seen as acceptable and other times things are not seen as acceptable. But, Jerry Ford joined corporate boards. You've got Bill Clinton doing incredible amount of speaking engagements, just came out with another book. And you've got Barack Obama creating a media company. So again, they're all transforming it in lots of different ways.
Yeah, let's talk about Gerald Ford. He was the one who made the way for the presidential pension, or he was the person who was very involved in what happens after you're president?
Yeah. So two separate things, right? So there was never a presidential pension. They always talked about it. They didn't do it. And in fact, when Lincoln dies, they have to give Mary some money. They have to give Garfield's wife money, right?
Is it true that Mary Todd was a big spender? Or was that just
God, yeah. She was like the drunken sailor when it came to money. And there's a fabulous new Broadway show called Oh, Mary.
Of course.
Oh, my God.
Yes, Oh,
right?
Mary.
Now, granted, in that show, Mary wants to sing cabaret. But if you think about it, they're tapping into this bigger than life persona that Mary Todd Lincoln was, right? And she was a big spender. And Lincoln, he was a saver. So they were very mismatched marriage wise. But when Lincoln dies, Mary, there's an estate, but Lincoln didn't leave an estate plan. And eventually Mary got money, but she was always a challenge. So going into, more recent history, when Harry Truman left the White House, there was no pension. And people thought Harry Truman was poor. And, they eventually put a pension in place and people said it was for Harry Truman. But unbeknownst to everyone, Harry Truman had saved a ton of money in the White House, right? And had basically, I think he saved about $750,000 over the course of his life. Doesn't sound like huge numbers today, but it's about $8 million in 1970s dollars when he died. But that brings up Jerry Ford, because Jerry Ford was never for having a presidential pension. He voted against it when they were trying to get one for Harry Truman. But Jerry Ford leaves the White House in 1977, and he's young. He's like 62, has nothing. He doesn't know what he wants to do. He's like, I'm young. What am I going to do? Golf all day? What does he do?
Wait, he stopped being president at what age?
62.
Oh my God, imagine that.
Yeah. But back then, he was like, I'm
No,
a
I
young
know.
guy. And he was frustrated because most of the people who become president will tell you it takes 2 years to learn the job. Okay. And he had just served 2 years and he lost the job. So he's like, he hires a Hollywood agent. He doesn't hire him. He gets advice from a Hollywood agent named Norm Brokaw, who says, look, we're going to come up with a multifaceted approach to building wealth. You're going to write a book. And Jerry and Betty were the first joint book deal. Barack and Michelle should thank them, right? And then and then at the same time, he said, you're going to do speeches, which Jerry Ford does. But then there was entrepreneurial endeavors. Now, in the book, I get into one that Jerry Ford gets into, which is the Franklin Mint, which is that very kitschy, metals and stuff that we see today. But back in the 70s, people thought it was fabulous stuff, that it was really legitimate collectibles.
Yeah. Well, I kind of remember in the 90s as a kid growing up that people thought it was cool.
Well, remember they had the Princess Diana dolls after she died? Like
and the
very.
plates and the... Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're Gen Z, it was plates, it was coins.
Oh my God, yes. It was, but in the 70s, people thought it was legitimate collectible materials. So Ford comes out with a series of presidential medals and the press just goes to town. They're like, who do you think you are? You never were voted in as president. And the only reason is because Nixon screwed up. That's the only reason you were president. And so Ford pivots. And he goes on corporate boards, and he's on 12 corporate boards at one point, and he's phenomenal at it. And he makes a ton of money. And when Ford dies in 2006, he dies with about $6-7 million. So he's able to transform himself in 1977 with only a couple $100,000 to millions at the time of his death. So he's the one who really expands this idea of monetizing. And so they should all thank Jerry Ford.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. Like even what I was going to get to next, which is the President Truman and Ike thing, because in terms of book deal type stuff, can you explain the Doubleday deal that he did with, and the ways in which, the idea that a president would write a book after their presidency is kind of like a given, but being strategic about it, I found pretty interesting.
Well, and by the way, it's a little gossipy because they weren't nice to each other, right? So at the end of World War II, Truman's president, and he has a lot of reverence for, the General Eisenhower. And basically even says to him, look, if you want to run on the Democratic ticket, I'll step aside. And Eisenhower's like, no. So Eisenhower obviously comes back to the United States. He finishes in the military and he becomes president of Columbia University. But in the meantime, he decides to write his memoirs. And Truman, who feels so strongly about what Ike did for the country, basically gets it so that Ike's memoirs are tax-free on the royalties. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. This has never happened before. But Ike didn't like Truman. They had a little bit of a tiff about a few things. And then Ike runs as a Republican. And by the time Ike is elected, Truman and Eisenhower are not even talking. There's a famous picture of them on their way to the inauguration in the car waving. They never said two words to each other. They were at each other's throats. They hated each other. And so when Truman writes his book, he thinks, oh, Ike's going to return the favor. And Ike doesn't. And Truman has to pay tax on his book, and a lot of tax. So this just keeps them sort of at odds with each other. But they finally do make up. And they make up in 1963 at the funeral of John F. Kennedy. Kennedy being assassinated shook both of them to their cores. And they met up at Blair House right after the funeral. And they spent the afternoon together and they made up laughing. They hugged, said goodbye, and they never spoke to each other again. So
men are insane.
But again, you don't think of them as being sort of nasty to each other, but they don't always all get along just because they've all been president. And it's sort of interesting. Jerry Ford did not like Bill Clinton, which cracks me up because they're the two presidents who both had different names at birth.
What do
Jerry
you mean?
Ford's real name is Leslie King. He changed.
Why did he change it?
So when he was born, his father was abusive to his mother, and his mother left his father. And
Okay.
she ended up divorcing him, remarrying, and he took his father's name, his stepfather's name. And with Bill Clinton's father came back from war, met Bill's mom. They got pregnant. And right before Bill was born, his father was in a car accident, but Bill was named after him. Bill Clinton's real name is William Blythe. And so when his mother, Virginia, married Roger Clinton, Bill Clinton took the Clinton name for his stepfather. So they didn't Ford didn't like Clinton, but yet both of them had these sort of similar parallel early beginnings.
Why didn't they like each other?
I think Ford thought that the charming charisma of Clinton, there was parts of it that he just didn't like. He didn't like Clinton's persona. And then
Jerry Ford's not going on Arsenio Hall playing the saxophone now, is he?
But Ford was of that era where there was reverence for the presidency. And obviously the Lewinsky scandal caused challenges, right?
Sure.
And so I think there were issues like that. And look, that's the thing.
Gerald Ford's probably glad he's dead right now.
Exactly. So, and it's funny who's friends with who with the presidents.
Yeah, we don't, it's very, it really creates the idea of the ruling class in the sense that you're like, oh, well, one's a Republican and one's a Democrat. And it's like, no, rich people are friends with rich people.
Well, or they don't get along, right? That's the other thing. They don't get along. Although I have to tell you, I love the fact that George W. Bush and Michelle Obama are like buddies at all the events. And they're always sort of hanging out together.
Doesn't say a lot of good things about the Obamas, I'll tell you that. Anyway, that's just my personal opinion. Let's talk about the Ford a little bit more in the Truman Ford financial anxiety continuum.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So everybody wakes up at 2 a.m. worried about money, right? Financial anxiety is something we all experience. But the truth of the matter is, it's really how you manage it. When you think of Jerry Ford, every time he came upon a financial decision that would cause anxiety and may cause someone to take the more traditional path, Ford was never afraid to go against the grain. He was not afraid to take risk. And so through that, when you take risk with your finances and you succeed, you build confidence. Truman, when he's born born into a farm family. And over the course of his early life, his family loses all their money. And then he embarks on a series of careers where he fails. So if you think about it, if everything you do financially doesn't succeed, it just creates greater anxiety. And with Truman, where this sort of comes into fruition is when he becomes president, the salary at the time was $50,000. And they raised it to $75,000 when he was in the White House. And
what is it now?
$400,000. And then they said, oh, by the way, we're going to give you a $50,000 tax-free stipend that you don't have to account for to pay for entertaining. But when Truman was president, they were renovating the White House, and he actually lived across the street at Blair House. So Truman not only saved his salary, but he saved all of this tax-free stipend. Now, after 2 years, Congress came back.
Because he wasn't entertaining.
Yeah, he was like, forget entertaining. He's like, I'm saving this. But after about 2 years, Congress said, you know what, we're going to make this taxable, and you have to account for it. So when he leaves the White House, he's good old Harry. People see him as like Joe Biden's middle-class Joe. He's good old Harry. He doesn't have a lot of money, or so they think. And, there's a great book out there about Harry Truman in retirement. He and his wife used to drive around the country in their car. You'd be in a diner, and here would walk in Harry Truman and his wife, because they didn't have Secret Service back then. You were on your own as a president. So he was always sort of frugal and very, very apprehensive about money. And he even fought them when they wanted to give him a pension. But it's because he was sitting on so much he had saved. And he saved it in very, very conservative notes. So a lot of times when I work with people, they struggle with something called bag lady syndrome. And I don't know, they call it bag lady syndrome, but it's probably bagman syndrome as well, right? Which is people have a fear once they have money and have financial success that it could all disappear. And if you think about it, over the course of American history, we've had, the Panic of 1837, the Panic of 1893, the Great Depression, the 2008, right? The Great Recession. In U.S. history, again and again and again, we go through booming times and busts. And so people get fearful because they've seen the worst that what can happen. And so what I tell people is, try to channel your inner Jerry Ford, which is even in the most anxious moments, don't be afraid to pivot or embrace risk as you work with your money, because you can be rewarded. And that's really the difference between Ford and Truman.
But I like this part where it says that Ford was still living paycheck to paycheck when he became president,
right?
And that he asked someone in the White House when he would be paid.
Right. Imagine this, right? Could you imagine? But by the way, that's not exactly uncommon, right?
No, I know.
Right, but it's such a, the fact that he's asking, and by the way, the first week he was president, they still lived in their old house because the Nixons hadn't moved out yet, really. So, he's living paycheck to paycheck the whole time he's in the White House. And, once he got the book deal, the first thing he wanted to do was buy a house and pay off the mortgage, which he did. And his daughter, Susan, talks about it in her oral histories. She said, Dad, the reason you have a mortgage is for the write-off. And she tries to explain it. And he's like, no, debt is debt. I'm paying off debt. Debt is bad. And by the way, he's not wrong, right? I mean, I have a mortgage. I'll tell you, I wish I could pay it all off. And I think a lot of Americans would, if they could pay it all off, would pay it all off, regardless of any tax incentives.
I didn't know this, that we're talking about the presidential salary, but that anything that you eat or buy, you have to account for.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? So I didn't realize that when you're president, you're responsible for your own clothes and food.
Yep. And unless it's a state dinner, the family pays for everything that goes on in the White House private quarters. And they all complain about it, right? Because you got to remember, they're putting all their stuff in storage, right? And now they're running this huge household in a house that is not considered particularly comfortable, right? And I think you saw this a bit with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago and Joe Biden with his house in Delaware. So a lot of times they don't want to even be in the house because it's just not a comfortable place. But they all have to pay. And I talk about it in the book. Michelle Obama at one point went on Jimmy Kimmel. And she talks about, Barack would one day, say, oh, I'm craving a peach. And it would be the middle of February. And then the next thing she knows, a beautiful peach would appear. And then she'd get a bill for $500. And she finally said to him, Barack, do not wish for things unless you run it by me first, because they would just get him what he thought he wanted, but he was getting charged for it. So it's not the most easiest arrangement inside the White House. And if you really pay attention, you do hear them all sort of kvetch about it a little bit. And regardless, Democrat, Republican, it drives them all crazy.
Yeah, I remember, this is unrelated, but I remember being taken by this child star that I was friends with who was so spoiled. And someone said to me, remember that since this girl was little, she's mic'd. So when she says, I'm thirsty, someone comes up just out loud to no one. Someone comes over and hands her a Diet Coke. Right. And I was like, right.
Yes.
So it's similar to what you're saying, where he's just like, oh man, I'm really craving a burrito, and then they're like, we'll bring you a burrito, and it has to be the best burrito of all time. Yeah, but the thing is that who's covering that? So it's expected, but then they're not really allowed to have other jobs, right? While they're in office.
First of all, they're way too busy to have other jobs, right? I mean, that's part of the challenge. And we've had situations that are complicated. So for instance, Lyndon Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird, had a radio station that became a TV station. They'd bought it in the 40s. Lyndon Johnson didn't come from money, but Lady Bird did. And Lady Bird's mother died when she was 4, and she inherited money, and her father taught her about money. And in the 40s, with her separate property, she buys a radio station, which they eventually evolve into a TV station. But the day after Kennedy shot, Lady Bird, who kept a taped diary, her diary entry for the day after the assassination talks about the funeral plans and how difficult this is and the nation and how hard it is. And then the last thing she says in the diary entry is, I'm being asked to consider to sell my business. And,
Well, the president can't own a TV station.
Well, here's the deal. We're a constantly evolving society. Until that point, up until the 70s, most of them didn't really have a lot of money, and there weren't a lot of strict rules about what they could do with their money when they were in the White House. Now, in 1952, Richard Nixon got on national television and read off his net worth in what's called the Checkers speech. But when the Johnsons got to the White House, there were no rules. But the Johnsons decided they would take the TV station and put it into a blind trust. And they had a third-party trustee, and they were not allowed to make decisions on the TV and radio station. And it survives the presidency. The Johnson daughters inherit it. They sold it in the early 2000s for over $100 million. But Jimmy Carter gets in office, and he has the peanut farms and the warehouses, and he puts his in a blind trust, and now it's mandated. But he puts an advisor to the White House as his trustee, and he gives his brother Billy control of some of the assets in the blind trust. What happens? Bad crops, bad decision-making. The Carters leave the White House $1 million in debt and have to sell their farm. So it's difficult to figure out what is the best thing to do with these blind trusts. And what's interesting right now, and my book is non-political, but it's not been brought up at all about with the second Trump administration, what will happen here is his business is going into a blind trust. Who's going to run them? And there's a reason why these types of decisions are important, because when they talk to the average American, most Americans, when they've surveyed them, like Pew Research surveys them, most Americans are so cynical today. They think people become politicians to make money. And so
I know a campaign, you will go in debt doing a campaign.
You'll go in debt. But here's the thing. Should politicians be allowed to even own individual stocks when they're serving in Congress or the White House? Because the beauty of ETFs today is that ETFs, you're not picking one company over another. You're just owning the broad index. And what was interesting is when we looked at Kamala Harris's finances during the campaign, Harris had completely divested herself of anything that would be conflict driven. She owned basically a diversified portfolio of ETFs. So very clean, very conflict free. And we need to have a better discussion of this as a country, because again, today we live in the day and age of branding, right? Influencing. So blind trusts are sort of archaic compared to how complex finance is today. What should people be doing with their money when they become a congressperson or a senator or the president?
Yeah, because the whole thing with Nancy Pelosi is what? They think she's insider trading?
Correct. Because she has, look, if you're in Congress, you have access to data the average investor doesn't have. And then look, when I work with my clients, I always tell them this. It could look like the most innocent, it could be the most innocent transaction. But if we reported it on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, what does it look like? And if you put that as the test, it can look totally nefarious. And that's part of the problem, right? So yeah, I don't know. If I was running for office, and I'm not planning on it, but I probably would divest into diversified ETFs. It's just clean. It's simple. And you know what? When you leave your position, you have other monetizing opportunities.
What is Trump's thing? What's he invested in?
So Donald Trump's finances, are complex for a number of reasons, right? So he does a lot of intricate tax and estate planning techniques, but he always pushes it a little bit further than need be, right? So what I mean by that is he's very aggressive when you're doing certain estate planning techniques in terms of valuations and discounts. So he's doing a lot of the right techniques, but he takes it very far. But his big thing is real estate. And so his portfolio is predominantly real estate. And you have to remember the tax code favors real estate. So you have people who own millions and millions of dollars of real estate, but pay very little tax on it because of depreciation. So when we think about tax fairness, one of the things that is inherently unfair in the IRS code is if you get a W-2, you're just going to pay ordinary income tax. Whereas if you're in venture capital or private equity, you get the rules on carried interest and get preferential tax rates, Or if you're in real estate, you oftentimes don't pay any tax because of depreciation.
It's interesting because you write about Trump as, people often say, well, he wasn't even a good businessman. And you write about, ways in which he did succeed. And then it's indicative of what we said before, where it was like, just because you always say, oh, we want a businessman to run the country, that's indicative of nothing in terms of how they would be as a president. And so I'm like, I wrote down after the part about Trump in your book, I wrote down, well, then why all the buffoonery?
Look, here's the thing about Trump, and this is true of any of these guys, right? First of all, we're in a very polarized political situation, and my book is non-political. No one is 100% all good or all bad, right? We don't live in a black and white world, and I think we all want to be treated with nuance. Donald Trump displays certain skills that are strong financial skills. I would make the argument that more Americans need to be comfortable with risk, and he's very good at using his charisma to find opportunity sets. Bill Clinton and George W. are very similar in this. They're very charismatic people, which brings them opportunities. And I have clients like this all the time. I'm constantly vetting opportunities for clients because they're just so well connected. Certain things just land in their lap. But what's really key, and this is where most people make mistakes, and I talk about this with Bill Clinton in the book, when you have an investment opportunity, even if it's just to do a regular public markets portfolio, ask a ton of questions. Kick the tires, because diligence is what matters when it comes to getting yourself in the right type of investment and in managing risk. And all of the presidents who were successful were never afraid to question. And one of the things I tell a lot of my clients is, when you're wealthy because you say no more than you say yes. Because when you're wealthy, you get a lot of opportunities, but you really shouldn't take all of them.
Yeah. And I know that the thing about Trump is the asking of questions. It's just the matter of listening. And it's also, it was also fascinating to me to hear. It's like decision making is so nuanced, right? Because there's a lot about Nixon too that is like very positive decision making. But then his big misstep was the stupidest decision of all time. You know what I mean? Like,
so let me tell the story real quick,
dude?
Right? So Richard Nixon was from Orange County, California, grew up son of a guy. His father had like a little grocery, and each of the Nixon boys was in charge of a certain section. He was in charge of produce, and in particular citrus. Fast forward, he's an attorney in Whittier, California, and he gets approached by a group of businessmen with this idea that they were going to have orange juice on every table in America. In the 1920s and 30s, their version of AI was frozen food. Like, we take it for granted now, right? Like, I go to Trader Joe's and I love their frozen food aisle. 1930s, they were still trying to figure out how to freeze strawberries. So they come up with this idea that they're going to freeze the orange juice, not the concentrate, which is down the line what ends up happening. But Nixon becomes the president of the company. He helps them set it up. But the friends and family round doesn't raise enough money. And then even with hiring people, he makes a huge mistake. He fails to file their Social Security paperwork. And he gets basically sued for this. And the business of moving orange juice around the company, the juice frozen, doesn't work. It implodes. And the whole business goes belly up. And Nixon was so close to finding something that could have really worked. Because if he had handled the financial stuff well, they might have realized it wasn't the juice you wanted to freeze. It was the concentrate. But somebody else figured that out in 1945. And thus Richard Nixon misses out on becoming the CEO of a company like a Minute Maid, and instead goes into politics. But Nixon had a lot of good skills. Now, I once worked with a client who we were being asked to invest in a startup. And I remember the startup CEO said to us, "This is great. This is my third startup. This is when you want to invest with me, because I've already, learned all the mistakes I have to make." And I remember thinking, okay, that's a wild thing to say, but there's truth to it. I think if Richard Nixon had started a second business, he might have been successful because he learned things from the failures of the first business. And that's what's really important in personal finance. Constantly succeeding doesn't always teach you anything. Having a setback, as long as you can pivot and propel back forward, is a really important skill in finance.
Yeah, there's so much more I could ask you about, which I'll do in the bonus bag.
Okay.
But for now, thank you so much for being here on this Tuesday. Where can people find you and your book?
Yeah, so you can find me at allthepresidentsmoney.com, and my book is available wherever books are sold and on amazon.com. So, I'd love if you buy a copy and feel free to let me know your thoughts. I want to hear what presidents you find fascinating.
Oh man, there was like a meme that was going around about like the people that go to your summer camp, and it was like the girl who's obsessed with all the presidents. And I was like, why is that girl a canon event? Like there is always that, and it's always a girl, and it's always some girl who's obsessed with the presidents. And I was like, yeah. And then when you mentioned that, like as a kid, I was like, yeah, that's a canon event. You cannot interfere.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was that girl.
Bad with Money with Gabriel S. Dunn is a production of Noted Bisexual, produced by Melisa D. Monts and Diamond MPrint Productions. Edited by Diane Kang, post-production sound by Coco Llorens, production assistance by Melanie D. Watson, and music by Mike Kaplan, Zach Sherwin, and Jack Dolgen, sung by Sam Barbera. Thank you, love you, bye!
This time of year, a good hoodie is absolutely essential, and the American Giant Classic Full Zip Hoodie is made to last a lifetime. With timeless style, heavyweight fleece, and durable details, you can depend on it for years to come. Snag the hoodie that will bring you comfort for life, the American Giant Classic Full Zip, and save 20% off your first order at american-giant.com when you use code CLASSIC24 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at american-giant.com, code CLASSIC24.
Big shout out to you for making it through the hectic holiday season. This new year, get clean, quality, pregnancy nutrient support off your to-do list, including Ritual's best-selling Essential Prenatal Multivitamin, designed with 12 traceable key ingredients to support a healthy pregnancy. With big changes coming up, take the small steps now and start today with 30% off a 3-month supply at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Some things you wouldn't mind being stuck with, like a huge inheritance. But a phone that has to be plugged in just right so it charges is not one of those things. Switch to Verizon and we'll pay off your old phone up to $800 via prepaid MasterCard for a new one on us. Just trade in any phone from our top brands with select unlimited plans. $829.99 purchase with new smartphone line on select unlimited plans. Minimum $90 per month with autopay plus taxes and fees for 36 months required. Less $830 trade-in/promo credit applied over 36 months. Trade-in terms apply. Payoff phone requires smartphone purchase and port-in with new smartphone line on select plan. Must provide most recent bill showing payoff amount of eligible phone. Additional terms apply.